now we will, start with the proper CISSP domain. So there are 8 domains, right? Okay. Now, to pass the exam, you have to pass in all domains. Okay, so every domain is equally important, right? So I will explain to you these 8 domains using a very, very simple example of, 2 people who are living in 2 houses, okay, at an island. One lives in island and other lives in the mainland, okay? This is the mainland that is on the shore, right? So there are 2 people living in 2 houses. Where there is person, this is Alice, and this is Bob. Okay. Now let's explain all the 8 domains using a small representation, right? The first domain is security and risk management, right? As per the new latest edition, it has got around 16% weightage. Okay. The application of security and risk management flows into all the 8 domains. The concepts which you learn from this particular domain, will be applied everywhere when you are taking a decision. Whenever you're going to make a decision, whenever there is a decision seeking question, or in your career itself, when you're looking at certain decision taking, this is the domain which is going to help you. Okay. So how does this happen? Now, Bob is living on an island. He has to consider the safety of this house. He has to consider his own safety, okay, from whatever is around him. So what he needs to assess the environment in which he is. He has to assess the environment. He is living in the sea. There could be tsunami, right? There could be an earthquake, okay? But he doesn't have a fear of road accidents. Why? Because he's the only person living on that island. There are no cars, there are no roads, right? So risk for him from tsunami is pretty high. Flooding is a option which could affect his threaten his assets, right? But road accident is something which he is not bothered about. Alice, on the other hand, is worried about tsunami, but not too much because she lives almost 10 kilometers away from the 8 kilometers away from the shoreline, right? So she's not worried about tsunami. So when she carries out a risk assessment of the environment around her, she finds that tsunami is something which is not going to affect her. Flooding is something which might affect her. Road accidents is something which can definitely affect her. Theft is another thing which is, going to affect her. But Bob is not worried about theft. Why? It's very difficult for a thief to take a boat and go all the way across the sea. Chances are there, but little rest. He can be rest assured. So he's not going to put certain strict controls around his house. Okay, why? Because he's not bothered about someone breaking into his house. He might just leave his house, uh, unlocked. There's no one on the island, right? But Alice, on the other hand, is worried because there are other people. There are multiple threats roaming around. There are bad actors roaming around. Okay. And she might secure her house with a big lock. Okay. And she might carry out a CCTV camera. She might put a big wall around the house. Okay. She's also worried about road accidents, okay, which might harm herself. So she might buy some insurance. Okay. She might buy some health insurance to cover her risks. Okay. Now, this is what we will see how it applies in information security domain in risk management. Okay. Now, once these are the risks Bob and Alice have evaluated, they need to put controls to secure themselves. Controls against whichever threats are the ones which are high priority. Okay. So once they put the controls, those risks level come down within their risk appetite, in their risk tolerance zone. So what happens? Then they say, okay, fine. Since I have road insurance, I will try to drive very, very safely. So I'm training myself to drive very safely. So Alice will reduce the effect of a road accident. She may not get into a road accident. Okay. Bob, on the other hand, to protect himself from tsunami, he cuts trees and takes his house a little upwards by erecting few, you know, base support. Why? Because he's worried that tsunami comes and there are 5 to 6 meter waves. So he takes his house 5 to 6 meter upwards. But he doesn't have to worry about road accidents and other things, right? So he has to manage that. But still, if there is a tsunami and his house is destroyed, Bob carries out a business continuity technique. What business continuity? He builds another house, okay, which is slightly more higher, okay, so that in case of his main house going out of action, he has some other alternative to go and, continue his life. What he is thinking about business continuity in case of any major disruption. So he's going to face a disaster if tsunami happens, and he might need some other place to stay and carry out with his job. On the other hand, Alice doesn't have to worry about tsunami because even if tsunami comes, it will not go deep inside because her house is pretty deep, right? She may not have to worry about a major disaster from tsunami, but she might have a more worrisome problem of any thief coming and try to break into, her house. So she might implement controls to function even when theft is there. So she might have a direct phone line to the police station. Again, this is a control. This is a compensatory control. She's compensating her threat by having a control which is more powerful, but not within her control. So she takes a telephone connection to call the police in case of a major threat level. And similarly, in the information and cyber domains, we carry out such assessments to reach to a conclusion as to how much risk are we ready to take, which risks are not acceptable, what to suppress. Okay. If you look at Alice, Alice is prone to a road accident. So what she has to do? She has to drive the vehicle very carefully. Other people living in this shoreline should also know how to drive properly. So they need to be trained. They need to be trained. And that's why human beings need to be trained at each and every level whenever they are handling any kind of systems. And that's why awareness and training goes hand in hand with security. Okay. So this is security and risk management. Then next step is asset security. Now, Bob and Alice, they say that what are the more premium assets which they need to protect. So Bob says that for me, this house is very important. I will protect this house. I will strengthen this house. This is my asset. Okay. Similarly, Alice also reaches a conclusion that this is her asset. But she also says that my car is also my asset because I'm dependent on this car. Bob, on the other hand, doesn't need a car. He lives a lonely life on the island, right? But he has identified the assets which are critical to him, and Alice has identified the assets which are critical to her, and they will protect those assets from any loss, oblique theft, oblique damage, right? So that they need to identify which are those critical assets, and that is what domain 2, that is asset security, deals with. The systems on which you rely to have your productivity. Okay. Then domain 3 is, now you need to protect this, but you need to engineer, right? Somebody has to build this. Somebody has to cut this tree, make the panels, take the house up. You have to engineer the solutions. And that's where the concept of security architecture and engineering comes. You have to architect these solutions, whatever you want to protect with, or you get a third party to build those solutions. Okay. So that is dealt with in architecture and engineering. Okay. Now what happens is, over a period of time, initially it was only Alice and Bob. It was Bob here and it was Alice here. Okay. So they did everything, and now they wanted to communicate. So they laid a small telephone line from the island to the shoreline to communicate with each other. Okay. So the moment they laid this line, right, this line, people started coming and tried to listen to their conversation. They didn't want to give them privacy. Okay. So Bob and Alice decided to secure this line using some kind of encryption. Okay. So they tried encryption so that nobody could listen to their conversation. And that's what in the domain 3, it is security architecture plus engineering plus encryption forms part of domain 3. Right? Domain 4 talks about communications and network security, which we all have, most of you, 95% of you have. So now you want to protect the entire communication medium, okay? And you put certain amount of controls, you put firewalls, you put IPS, IDS systems, okay, to protect this complete network per se, okay? So you want to protect this network and you implement certain controls, and domain 4 deals with that, okay? After a few days, Bob erects a wireless antenna. Alice erects a wireless antenna, and they start communicating on radio waves. Okay, and people started listening here, so they also implemented controls here, and that's why a lot of communication and network security goes into the wireless domains. Okay, right? After they did wireless, they realized, oh, we need more data. So what they did, they laid a optical fiber cable between Alice and Bob. Why? They needed high bandwidth. But again, the problem was optical fiber cable suffered from the sea waves will come and break it. Okay, somebody will cut it and steal it. So communication started getting, interfered with. So they prepared a redundant line and put another fiber to have redundancies. So why do you have redundancies? Because it affects the availability of the information. So that you have a redundant line. Okay. Now, this concept of availability comes from domain 1. Okay. Then what happened over a period of time? Alice and Bob. So Alice is alone here. Bob is alone here. But Alice, somebody tries to duplicate Alice, and there are 2 or 3 more Alices. Over a period of time, somebody takes a boat, goes to Bob, and replicates Bob also. They start settling down here. So there are multiple users. Now, when the original Bob wanted to speak to Alice, original Alice, he can't identify. So therefore, they need to have a identity and access mechanism to understand that we are communicating with the right Bob and the right Alice. And that's why domain 5, identity and access management comes in. Okay. Okay, we did all that. And now Bob and Alice are very sure that they have a very secure arrangement to survive on this planet, but they need to test this complete arrangement. And that's why domain 6 comes in. That is security testing. Okay. You've done all this. And now 7th is you need to operate all these assets which you have created. You created a house on top of a, thing. She has created a house with strong access control against theft. Police is there. A lot of things. They have to operate it, right? They have to run the show. And that's why security operations is the 7th domain. And finally, 8th is SDLC. System Development Lifecycle. Now, Alice and Bob evolved over a long period of time. They have communication networks. They have networks with police. They have their own house. They have laid optical fiber cables. And once they were developing this, it has a lifetime. Okay. Somebody brings an idea, implements an idea, and the idea dies after some time. And you have to maintain, operate, test, run this system over its entire life cycle. And this might involve a large amount of hardware and software. And SDLC, or software system development lifecycle, mainly deals with the software part, because most of these systems which will work will depend on software, and therefore you have to have a very strong software development philosophy inside the system development lifecycle. Okay, this is how the entire 8 domains correlate with our normal life. Now, domain 1, security and risk management, puts its fingers across all these domains. Whatever decisions you're going to take, whether for security operations or security testing or SDLC, will be based on decisions which you will make from the concepts of domain 1, that is security and risk management. Okay, that's how we will go to domain 1, that is security and risk management. Any doubts till now? Please ask. Any questions?
Sir, you said the exam would be adaptive, right? So the question will get changed. I mean, like, will get person to person. I mean, like, if four of people are appearing the same time, we would have the same different
Different
set of.
question. It's supposedly a question bank of around 10,000 questions.
Uh-huh.
And that's why this exam is so revered. That's why the pass percentage, appearance percentage, people who sit for the exam is 10%. That means out of 10 of you, only one will sit for the exam. That's the ratio.
Also, so in terms of like the weightage, like you said, the AI/ML will take into effect, but in terms of like the weightage across domains, that does not change basis your weakness or strength, like you were mentioning. Like if
So
I am
there is
yeah.
a set weightage. Domain 1 has 16%, domain 2 has, I think, 11%, 10%, domain 3 has 15%, domain 4 has 15%, domain 5 has 10%, domain 6 has 10%, domain 7 has I think domain 7 has got higher percentage, I think 15, and domain 8 is balanced. You can work out 10 or something like that. Okay. So now what happens is, this is the domain weightage, right? So questions that will come will follow the rough pattern, right? So that means out of 150 questions, 16% will be from domain 1. Now, that doesn't mean one single question will be from domain 1. Please understand that. A question might test you, one single question might test you on 3 domains. It might be a mix of IAM, it might be a mix of security and risk management, it might be a mix of SDLC. So that's why you actually cannot make out this question is being asked from where. Why? Again, the thing is, it's a conceptual level application. You will not come to know whether it's domain 1 or domain 2. Few questions will be straightforward. Okay. So how the exam goes is, the exam has initially a very a gauging pattern. The exam is trying to gauge your weakness and strengths. Once it gauges it, depending upon your, this first 5, 6, 8 questions, the exam just takes off from, say, question 6 to 7 to around 70 questions. This is your main focus period. The difficulty level just shoots up like hell. Okay, you just don't understand what you are reading. Okay,
So
initially.
analyzing weakness, I mean, like, when the questions will get prompt to us, I mean, like, how many incorrect answer we are marking, or like how much time we are trying, I mean, taking to answer them. How this will get calculated over there. I mean, like, a weakness
No, no,
or
no.
strength.
You don't come to know anything about it.
Okay.
There is no visibility into how ISC2 marks the question. These are all from the whatever the board gives them. So board tells you that the exam engine is meant to make you pass. It is not meant to make you fail. Okay. So the moment it sees that you are not going well in certain domains, it reduces the difficulty. But the general pattern is upwards. Okay. You don't need to worry about all that. If you are well prepared, you don't need to worry about all this.
What's the maximum weightage? I mean, like we have is out of 100 or what?
Okay, so the exam is now going to be 150 questions, right? Out of which, once you start appearing, the exam might shut down at 100 questions. If the exam engine has deduced that you have scored 70% marks within these 100 questions, because it's a relative marking system, not 1:1. If the exam engine sees that you have scoring 70% within these 100 questions, the exam will stop here. Dot at 100. But if the exam has not stopped at 100 and you have gone to 101st question, that means the exam engine is trying to make you pass. You should become more careful now. Okay? That means you are at the borderline. And if the exam engine closes at 101st, that means you were almost past one odd question. But the moment you are going 102, 103, people pass at 150 also. People pass at 150. People fail at 100 also. The exam engine knows that even if he throws you 50 questions, you will not be able to pass. That means you have done abysmally bad. Very few people do reach there. Okay, but there are few people whose exam shuts down at 100 question also. Okay, and that's why it's a respected exam. Anybody who does CISSP, generally you know that that person has worked very hard. Okay, that is the crux of the entire exam. So conceptually, if I ask you what is least privilege, if you are able to explain to me, you will pass this exam without attempting any practice question. Okay. Once I went for this exam, I realized that I have over prepared. Okay. I thought that with my experience set, I should have just read the CIBEX once and should have done the CIBEX practice questions 3rd edition once. That was more than enough. I appeared once I had experience around 19-20 years, right? That was my experience. At the same time, there are a few young people who have 7-8 years of experience. They said, no, good that we prepared for so hard, so long, okay? Because we were not aware of such concepts, okay? So that's the mantra.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe our channel.